안녕하세요, 여러분. 함께 해주셔서 감사합니다. 스페셜 세션 6번 세션입니다. 글로벌 인도주의 노력 공조라는 세션입니다. 저는
I'm also the editor of the Armed Conflict Survey, which is one of the flagship publications of the IISS, where we try to monitor and cover conflict across the world. So very relevant for this session. So we'll be trying to discuss in this session challenges and also best practices in coordinating humanitarian operation and disaster relief at the domestic, regional and global level in this era we are currently in, which is of accelerating climate change on one side, but also increasing conflictual world with a lot of war going on and challenging actually the limited resources all countries have to devote to humanitarian aid and also disaster relief. Armed forces have been very much playing a very key role in the humanitarian response across the world, while continuing to tend to their core traditional defense responsibility at home and abroad. This often creates a challenge of prioritization in the context of very limited resources, and increasingly so. As the demand for humanitarian support and disaster relief is not going to become less, if anything is going to, unfortunately, to increase, given the state of the world as it is now, it is important, it's very important, it's crucial really to identify best practices and also new solutions on how the international community can meet its obligation to population in need. So including on coordination between the civilian and defense authorities, the new regional approaches maybe, and also reinforcing preparedness to this kind of humanitarian needs and also disasters at the national and regional and also global level. So we are joined today by a panel of civilian and defense army leaders, which really will share their experiences and hopefully best practices on how to do so. And we are hoping really that the conversation will also give us new ideas and new, I would say, really thinking outside the box of what could be an effective way to actually tend to those humanitarian needs, bearing in mind that resources are increasingly limited, and unfortunately, climate change is also not waiting for the resources to be ready to be devoted to them. So before I introduce the panelists, I just wanted to say a couple of housekeeping consideration. So I think that by now you know how to use the mic, but just in case, I will just repeat: if you want to ask a question, please, you should put your badge in the little slot that there is on the right side of your mic, and you should actually push the speak button. That doesn't mean that you will be allowed to speak straight away. You will be allowed to speak. I will need to approve you, and hopefully we'll have lots of questions. So when you see your mic turning red, that's when it's active for you to speak. So that's very easy, but I just wanted to remind everybody. So our esteemed panelists will have 5 minutes for remarks, introductory remarks, and then we will open the floor for discussion, and hopefully we'll have an interactive conversation on these very important issues. So I'm just going to introduce the panelists in order in speaking order. So to my left, Dr. Pal Johnson, who is Minister of Defense in Sweden. We are then going to be talking with the Minister for Home Affairs and Immigration of Fiji, Pio Tikoduadua, on my right, and then we are going to our generals more on the military side of the equation. So we are joined also by General Romeo Browner Jr., Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, to my left, extreme left, and General Angus Campbell, Chief of the Defence Force in Australia, to my right. So if I can give you the floor, Minister, for your remarks.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for IISS for arranging the conference, and of course also for Singapore to hosting it. It's really a privilege to be here, and it's my second consecutive year where I am here, and I always stress I come here to listen, and I come here to get a deeper understanding of this region, and also to discuss what we jointly can do in order to provide also stability and security in the Indo-Pacific region. I just want to say that as an as an approach for me as a European. I will try to compare and contrast a little bit how we're grappling with the concept of humanitarian operations in Europe right now and other places. And let me just start off with Sweden has a long tradition of participating in international peace support operations since the late 1940s. Actually, we did our first peacekeeping operations, and we have a heritage and a legacy of doing that. Normally, when we speak about humanitarian operations in Europe, we think of it as alleviating human suffering, and that could be, for example, the disaster relief when you use the armed forces for that object, and we're still doing that after the earthquake in Turkey. For example, we continued with civilian contingencies and some assets and resources from the Swedish armed forces on that. But on balance, if you look at how much we are engaged into international peace support operations now and a decade ago, you will find that we now, because of resource limitations, are more focused on defense and deterrence back home due to Russia's illegal aggression against Ukraine. And also we do training, but we do of Ukrainian soldiers. So that also puts some limitations to our ability to participate in international peace support operations and humanitarian operations, even though, of course, we're going to be continuing doing them. I guess if you would broaden the scope of challenges to humanitarian operation, you can take note, of course, that revisionist powers, malign state actors, terrorists challenge our way of life, and they challenge also what we like to refer to as the rules-based international order. And this is a challenge, and of course, nowhere is that being felt more than in Ukraine now, due to Russia's illegal and unprovoked full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and it forced Sweden also to rethink and revamp its approach to security by becoming a full-fledged member of NATO on the 7th of March this year. So that was a big step for us to take. We always say supporting Ukraine is about standing up for the rules-based international order, because we don't want an international order where might give right. But I also say that supporting Ukraine is both the right thing to do and the smart thing to do, because from a European perspective, it's seen also as an investment into our own security, because we fear if Russia would be successful in this war, it would increase the pressure on neighboring states, and it would be a source of inspiration for Russia and a big setback for us, and therefore we're going to continue supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes, and it's about standing up for a rules-based international order. So I just want to stress that. There are, of course, other factors who are going to have a major impact, of course, on the need for humanitarian operations. The most evident is, of course, thinking about climate change, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing that from the minister from Fiji as well, that this is a very serious threat to our common security as well, that will put on pressure on our societies. In Sweden, we have also a tradition of working on something we call the total defense concept as well, and working quite a lot on civil defense and also on resilience. And that makes you better to handle a crisis or a wartime situation. So resilience is a big concept that we've been collaborating also very closely with Singapore, actually, on this concept of, it's really a whole of government endeavor. So that's some of the aspects that we're grappling with. Just on another note, just connecting the Euro-Atlantic area and the Indo-Pacific area, there is a strong interlinkage of this that we are very much cognizant and aware of. We have, of course, interest into this region as well, being a small and trading country, being export-oriented. Freedom of navigation is, of course, safe sea lines of communications is also extremely important. When that's being challenged, we try to rise to the occasions, and right now it's being challenged in the Red Sea, as you know, and therefore we have this EU mission called Aspides, where Sweden is engaged too as well in assuring that the Houthis are not able to hinder the transportation of commodities for civilian ships as well. So that's something we would stress. Just a few words then on how about to go about doing this kind of operations on humanitarian operations. I think there's three buzzwords, I think, which are really crucial. I think unity, about defending the rules-based international order. It's about building strong political and security partnerships and cooperation, and it's having the resolve to act as well. And just on this note, just to underline that also for Sweden, this region is very important and becoming even more important. That's of course due to trade patterns, but also due to the depth of distance into some technologies, such as, for example, in cyber, disinformation. That's global factors to it as well. And therefore, we're right now in the work of drafting a new defense policy strategy for the Indo-Pacific, and it's going to entail 3 cornerstones. First is going to be engagement on the defense policy lines. It means like coming to venues like this and having strong interaction and political dialogue with political leaders and military actors in this region. It's going to be about military engagement. That could be our footprint into this region. Of course, we, on the contrary to, for example, France, don't have a permanent presence here on the naval area, but it could be that we could contribute to having manning on various ships or command structures. And of course, another backbone of our collaboration into this region is also based on defense industry, technology, innovation, and material acquisition, where we have long traditions, of course, of cooperating predominantly with Singapore, Australia, and Japan, to mention a few. So that's a few of our few introductory remarks, at least. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. It was really a very good overview of Sweden engagement in the region. And I think it was particularly interesting what you were saying about the total defense concept and this concept of resilience, which I think is really important also when we talk about really addressing humanitarian needs. And it's something we're discussing as well, the preparedness to really face these emergencies. The floor is yours, Minister.
Thank you, Maya. My colleague ministers, my fellow members of the panel today, General Angus and CDF from the Philippines. First of all, good afternoon to you all, Isambuli Winaka, senior officials, distinguished leaders, and security experts. I thank Director General Dr. Bastian Gigrich for his exemplary hosting of this year's dialogue and for inviting me in particular to share my experiences in this session with such esteemed colleagues as you see us up here. In the last few years, there has been an uptick in demand for military assistance in the face of emergencies in the Pacific Islands region and in the world. Extreme weather events attributable to climate change are driving this and will continue to do so for as long as the world drags its feet on meaningful mitigation, adaptation, and in resilience. Since June 2022, militaries around the world have deployed in response to over 280 climate-related disasters. In the Blue Pacific, our militaries have been called on to assist civil authorities in the face of tropical cyclones, floods, and bushfires triggered or exacerbated by the changing climate, all while Pacific Island nations stand responsible for less than 0.1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Our militaries face concurrent demands as cyclones hit back-to-back or combine with other events like floods, health emergencies, volcanic eruptions, and traditional security threats. On our current trajectory, we will be stretched thinner and thinner unless we leverage partnerships. Partnerships with civil authorities, non-governmental organizations, communities, and of our neighbors and of our friends. Now, the challenge of coordinating humanitarian operations starts at home, before seeking or offering the assistance of the armed forces in the face of an emergency. It is crucial for roles and responsibilities to be clear. Internal coordination mechanisms must respect the primacy of civilian agencies in emergency management and response. And I think that is very important to note, because it's, the military really should be in a strong supportive role, because often at times because of the way that we organize, we want to be taking the lead. So civil primacy is something that is important to be is brought to bear. Internal coordination mechanisms must respect the primacy of civilian agencies in emergency management and response, while being able to bring the resources of the military to bear in a supporting role as needed. The primacy of civilian leadership scales up to multi-state responses. When Fiji offers humanitarian assistance to partners, we seek to offer the full suite of strengths, skills, and resources that are available to our nation. This coordinated approach optimizes our ability to meet partner needs. In the face of regional emergency responses, Fiji has provided the support of the Republic of Fiji military forces, as well as personnel from our National Disaster Management Office, the National Fire Service, and the Fiji Emergency Medical Assistance Team. Last year, South Pacific Defense Ministers endorsed a regional HADR interoperability guide that clarifies how the defense forces in the region seek and offer assistance within a civilian-led disaster response framework. So in the South Pacific, we are trying to look at this at the regional level, given to the small sizes of our economy and of our forces. Now, the guide codifies what we have learned through regional exercises and operations over the decades. From tabletop exercises to large-scale regional exercises, we are constantly testing our interoperability with partner militaries and civilian agencies in the Blue Pacific and beyond, making sure that the processes are clear and relationships are strong before emergencies unfold. Now, that's not to say that things are perfect. There is plenty of room for improvement. And even if there wasn't, maintaining the status quo would be akin to going backwards in the face of rising HADR demands and a deteriorating geostrategic environment, which together are placing increasing demands on our armed forces. So how can we do better? It is imperative that we increasingly weave concurrency into our planning and exercises. I can't recall the last time an emergency occurred in isolation. Between 2020 and 2022, our armed forces supported the domestic response to 2 tropical cyclones and regional response to a volcanic eruption in Tonga, all while helping in Fiji's COVID-19 response and maintaining peacekeeping deployments in Africa and in the Middle East. We must plan for concurrency. In addition to embedding the assumption of concurrency into planning and exercising, South Pacific Defense Ministers are scoping the establishment of a Pacific Response Group. This group would comprise military personnel from across the Pacific, serving as a standby unit to help civil authorities in the face of disaster. Available at a moment's notice and interoperable by default. A Pacific Response Group would heighten regional readiness, saving lives and livelihoods through timely disaster response. Distinguished guests, the HADR coordination challenges we face in the Blue Pacific aren't unique. There is much we can learn from joining together in dialogue as we strive towards a safe, secure, and prosperous region and world. Now, therefore, look forward to hearing from my fellow colleagues and engaging with your questions throughout the later what time we are going to spend here together. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. And it's actually very, very important to hear the voice of a small state island, right? Because the challenges are even worse in terms of climate vulnerability. So, and the resources are probably more limited. And it's really good to hear about the Pacific Response Group, which I think is again a good best practice we can offer for other regions as well. We now move to our military part, to our military panelists. And I will give the floor to General Browner first from the Philippines.
Thank you, Irene. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great honor that I represent the Armed Forces of the Philippines at this prestigious assembly, where we gather to deliberate on matters of paramount importance to our collective security and humanitarian obligations. So today, I would like to share my insights on the topic coordinating global humanitarian operations, leveraging on our broad experience in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, or HADR. The Philippine archipelago is situated in a region that is highly susceptible to natural disasters, positioned in the Pacific Ring of Fire and in the path of tropical cyclones. On the average, we have around 20 tropical cyclones every year. We face an array of natural calamities ranging from typhoons to volcanic eruptions. This geographical vulnerability necessitates a sophisticated and resilient disaster response mechanism, which our armed forces, through the Armed Forces of the Philippines Civil Military Coordination Center, or CMCC, have developed and refined over the years. The CMCC operates at the national, regional, and provincial levels in collaboration with the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council and the Office of Civil Defense. This structure ensures a streamlined and efficient approach to crisis management, allowing for the rapid mobilization of resources and the effective delivery of aid to the affected communities. Furthermore, the Civil Military Coordination platforms represents a pivotal development in our humanitarian efforts. Through regular interactions like the AFP Philippine Humanitarian Country Team Quarterly Dialogue, we bridge the gap between the military and the civilian humanitarian efforts. These dialogues, facilitated by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, provide a recurring opportunity for the various stakeholders to align strategies and share critical information. Our latest initiative, the crafting of a terms of reference for these dialogues, marks a significant milestone, formalizing this collaborative effort to enhance our operational effectiveness. In addition to our national efforts, the Armed Forces of the Philippines is an active participant in the regional and global HADR exercises, which is an affirmation of our commitment to regional stability and cooperation. By working alongside our neighbors and partner nations, we not only refine our own capabilities, but also contribute to a framework of collective resilience against disasters. These initiatives allow us to test our strategies, improve communication channels, and foster a spirit of cooperation that transcends borders. As we all have experienced, the challenges posed by natural disasters and crises are universal, recognizing no borders. In our global quest to manage disasters effectively, the pillars of preparedness, coordination, and a shared commitment to human dignity stand as the fundamental components of successful humanitarian operations. Preparedness is not merely about having the right tools and protocols in place. It is about cultivating a culture of readiness in every level of our organizations, from the individual soldier to the entire armed forces of the Philippines. This involves rigorous training, continuous improvement of strategies, and the implementation of advanced technologies to ensure we can respond swiftly and effectively when calamities strike. Coordination, the second pillar, requires a harmonious and synchronized effort among diverse entities. It encompasses the strategic integration of activities between military and civilian agencies, international bodies, and non-governmental organizations. Effective coordination ensures that our resources are utilized optimally, our responses are timely, and that no efforts are duplicated, thus maximizing the impact of our interventions. And lastly, a shared commitment to uphold human dignity reflects the core motive behind our actions. This commitment transcends logistical and tactical considerations, reminding us that at the heart of our operations are people, individuals, and communities in distress. Our ongoing efforts and experiences underscore our dedication to these principles, both within the Philippines and in our broader global engagements. And let me just give you some examples of these global engagements. During the Super Typhoon Haiyan that hit the Philippines in November of 2013, more than 30 countries and international organizations came into the Philippines to help us. And we used a mechanism called the Multinational Coordinating Center, MNCC, to coordinate all the actions of these various countries and international organizations. And I had that lucky opportunity to be the head of one of the hubs of the MNCC located in Manila. And so every day, the partner nations and the international organizations would meet together. They would give us the resources that they have, and then we would direct them to the places where they are needed most. During the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, all of us experienced that. The first batch of vaccines that arrived in the Philippines came from China. And I was one of the first recipients of the Sinovac vaccines. During the 2010 Haiti earthquake, our Filipino peacekeepers were one of the first responders to help the victims of that earthquake. The 2011 tsunami in Thailand was one devastating disaster that wherein the Philippines sent our doctors and relief goods. The earthquake in Turkey in February of 2023 saw the Philippines sending also a rescue and recovery team composed of soldiers and civilian doctors. And also the wildfires in Maui, Hawaii. Last year, our President Marcos, sent a substantial amount of money to help the victims because some of them were Filipinos. So as we continue to navigate the complex challenges, the importance of strengthening our international cooperation frameworks becomes increasingly clear. Together, let us continue to build on our collective experiences, enhance our capabilities, and reinforce our commitment to safeguarding communities around the world and the human race. So thank you very much for your attention. Good afternoon.
Thanks, General. It's very impressive overview of the spread of the operation that the Philippines is doing across the world in support of humanitarian needs and disaster relief. And also, I really like what you said about the coordination need for as one of the pillars of your way of looking at those disasters, and the preparedness, which I think is something that maybe we can expand a little bit later on how we build preparedness. I think that's a big challenge. And with that, I will pass the floor to General Campbell as our last panelist.
Thanks very much, Irene, and thank you to my fellow panelists, and also to IISS and Singapore for putting on a magnificent conference. When I think about operations, I tend to move into a model that looks at three levels of analysis. I think about the individual and sub-state actor, typically the terrorist, now made much more powerful, much more influential and effective by modern technologies, both technologies that can cause violence and technologies that can instantaneously, globally communicate across the planet. I also think, of course, about the competition between states, and we see that in the great power tensions in the world today, and that classic expression that suggests, do we live in an age of strategic competition? And I think also at the level of an angry planet made violent by our common neglect, climate change. And it's on us all. But climate change matters so much more in areas where there's fragility in terms of scale, capacity, human resource, and economic finance, and the kinds of things that large, advanced, developed countries take for granted in terms of their depth in responding to things. So the Pacific Islands Forum community, in their Boy Declaration, acknowledges climate change as their first security concern. And it's important to pay attention to it, because that's what they're telling us. So these three levels of analysis, the individual, the state, and the planet, each of them, and all of them in combination, can create the circumstances where a humanitarian response is required. Now, that humanitarian response might be part of a wider response, or it might be the focus. For the Australian Defence Force, we look at the idea of humanitarian operations spanning from disaster relief through to peacekeeping operations. So below the level of conflict or war, but recognise that those kinds of activities, disaster relief, peacekeeping operations, response activities, stabilisation missions, may be occurring inside a war. And there's three things that you won't be surprised we are always conscious of needing. First is the legitimacy to act, that whether it's regional, it's global, it's individual affected state or party, we have a lawfully substantiated authority to utilise the instruments of Australia's national power to engage. The second is political support, both domestically in our own country and also in a receiving country or a receiving group, whether it is a country or not, or groups within a country. And then the capacity in certain circumstances beyond disaster relief to either impose or threaten the use of force where it is necessary to do so for the protection of life. Now, what you typically get in that sort of a setting is more legitimacy and more political support means less utilisation, less need for force, and more sustainable long-term outcomes. Less legitimacy, less political support, potentially the unfortunate possibility of more force or more threat of force. But unfortunately, far less sustainable, and I'd call these effects rather than outcomes. All the humanitarian operations we think about from the point of view of they are whole of government problems and they need whole of government responses. We also see them as settings in which multilateral outcomes, multilateral responses are always better than unilateral responses. And also, in all these operations, they require, if a military is to be present in some way, discipline and cultural respect from all to all, so that the military component is a force for good and nothing more. I'd also note that we ought to all expect that all these kinds of operations are long-term, even if they don't turn out to be. The planning assumption should be that they're long-term. And I would prefer, and sometimes in some of these operations, the military component of that long-term effect is short-term. And the whole of government civil components take precedence as quickly as possible. Australia trains with our regional partners, both bilaterally, all through the Pacific, and through the ASEAN Community of Nations and the wider Indo-Pacific. We also work directly to regional fora like ASEAN and particularly through the Defence Ministers Meeting Plus component of ASEAN, as well as working with member nations of the Pacific Islands Forum, and as Minister Tikaduadua said, in particular, working to look towards a Pacific response group that builds on the capacities resident in the militaries of the Pacific community. And of course, we work both in training, development and participation in actual peacekeeping operations under UN mandate. In certain circumstances, also under or multilateral mandate where it is appropriate. I mentioned before the issue of strategic competition, and there is strategic competition in the world, and it doesn't go away when a humanitarian operation emerges and a response is required. Sometimes that can be problematic and needs very careful political diplomatic management. At the same time, some of the new technologies can be extremely beneficial and also difficult. So modern social media can communicate en masse, instantaneously, and can help to galvanise populations, inform populations, encourage populations to move to locations of safety and so forth. That said, narratives, credibility, the management and manipulation of truth can also all be expressed through modern social media technologies, to the point where the perceptions being received by affected individuals are their reality. And we've got to be really conscious of that we are as much projecting into the narrative space as a whole of government, multinational, legitimate contribution to their well-being. So I've mentioned things like the work we do with regional partners and regional forums. That's all about developing peacekeeping capacity, contributing training support, being a strategic capabilities provider, such as strategic lift for Pacific Island nations who might be contributing to UN or multilateral peacekeeping missions, as well as providing logistic capacity over the shore and by airlift in circumstances where disasters hit. What we're trying to do is see the combination of middle power effects by larger regional nations and small power effects from local organisations, militaries and communities to work in complement. A great example of that would be the peacekeeping and disaster training centre that has been worked in cooperation between Australia and Fiji at Blackrock. Another tangible experience would be when the earthquake, volcanic eruption, tsunami struck Tonga, one communications device was left functional in that entire country. It happened to be in the hands of Australia's maritime support advisor to the commander of the His Majesty's Armed Forces of Tonga. It was a digital phone, and for 3 days that was the single pathway to communicate to a nation that had just gone black, from a vibrant community to just technological zero in a digital sense. And through that phone came all the support that our partners in the FRANZ community, France, New Zealand, Australia, and our partners across the Pacific Islands Forum, and our partners more broadly across ASEAN and Indo-Pacific could provide. I just want to finish by saying that for us, these are always civil-led responses. And they only become military-led when there is no other option. And it is always better when we're bringing together partners. So I said earlier, we live in an age of strategic competition. That's the often the headline comment. But I want to reflect to you that in 2018 I was here as a participant at Shangri-La. And Shangri-La was a series of plenary sessions and speed dating bilaterally through the Indo-Pacific. I would have done 15 to 20 bilateral engagements. Today, in 2024, there's plenary sessions, extraordinary speakers, leaders of nations, and I'm going to more multilateral dialogues than I am to bilateral dialogues. The idea of multilateral, minilateral activity, engagement, conversation is now the norm of my experience. So perhaps competition is actually driving the live response of living in an age of cooperation. Thank you.
Thanks, General. Really, lots of food for thought here. I think it was very interesting what you were saying also about the strategic competition and what you were saying now, whether it's going to really spur a new need for cooperation, multilateral or regional cooperation. And also what you said about new technologies is something that, again, it's a challenge, but it also could be, as you mentioned, could be something that could really help reach the humanitarian needs wherever they are. And I guess that's one of the big questions of new technology, right? It's the good and bad of them. So I will just open the floor for questions. Don't be shy. If not, I have a couple of questions myself. Okay, great. We have 3 questions. I'll start with Viraj, my colleague Viraj.
Thank you, Irene. I have 3 questions, but for different speakers, so I'll try to be brief in this. Firstly, to the Minister for Home Affairs from Fiji, thank you for highlighting perspective from a small island nation, especially on climate change as well. What more would you like to see from major powers to help smaller states in combating climate change? Because for island nations, this really is an existential threat, and one that requires cooperation from small islands, but also from major powers as well. So it'd be good to hear from you on that. Secondly, for Generals Campbell and Brawner, in the Indian Navy tries to focus on being a first responder to humanitarian issues, and this is really one of the selling points I think the Indian Navy has tried to focus on over the last few years. What steps do you think other nations can try and work together to really provide a division of labour on becoming a first responder to incidents in different regions? And thirdly, for the Minister of Defence from Sweden, what do you think are the prospects of enhancing cooperation between the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific regions? And as General Campbell mentioned at the end, there's growing number of minilaterals. Do you think more minilateral groupings between Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific partners can be established as well? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Perhaps from our perspective, maybe 2 issues. First of all, the wider global need for reduction of carbon emission. That's the big one. So we're trying very hard at every COP's conference to ask, particularly the biggest carbon emitters of the world, as long as they do that without mitigating that, then we will continue to remain, exactly where we are, if not worse. And the second thing, perhaps, from the rest of the world, the superpowers, is climate adaptation funds. There is little we can do because we have whole islands that are going underwater. And rising sea level is a big problem, amongst many others. So if you're unable to relocate our communities or build sea walls to stop water, And obviously the lives or the survival of communities are under threat. And that is what it is right now. So those perhaps are the two main issues that we consider as quite important from a small island state. Thank you.
I'll offer a view, and I think General Brown might also. In regard to the idea of first responder nations and so forth, I think all militaries have experience in some way across that spectrum from disaster relief to peacekeeping in a humanitarian operation sense. And if for no other reason than they have that experience in support of their own people and their own communities. Our focus internationally is to ensure that we are supporting the affected nation in the manner in which that affected nation seeks support. And so while I wouldn't necessarily immediately suggest a formalised distribution of areas for nominated first responder nations as coordinators, because ultimately the coordinator function has to be something that the affected nation is welcoming. But I would encourage, wherever it is possible, nations to reach out into flexible groupings so that whatever the circumstances, an arrangement can quickly be produced because it has in some form, albeit slightly different, it's been practiced. And the more we practice, the more we get procedures, more that we understand and have familiarity working with each other, the easier the response is. And over time, the more communities of nations become comfortable with the way a regional grouping might be offering support to them. So I think this is a process over time, and it has to be very sensitively done and always in support of the affected nation.
Yes, in the case of the Philippines, you mentioned about the first responders being the members of the armed forces. I also failed to mention that it's not just the regular members who are considered the first responders, but even the reservists are also the first responders in their respective areas of operation. Now, there are two ways by which the other countries can help the first responders, and this is in terms of preparing them for that role. Number one is through training. So it's very important that we train together, as mentioned by Angus. In the case of the Philippines, Japan has played a very important role in terms of training our first responders. And second is through capability development. And this is in terms of the provision of the latest equipment and tools that can be used for disaster response and relief. And then again, we would like to thank the government of Japan for really providing us with this latest equipment and tools. So thank you.
Yes, a few reflections on the format, bilateralism, unilateralism, or international organizations. Just going back to the drivers of this increased awareness in Europe of this region's strategic significance, I think there are a few drivers of it. I think that if you look in terms of economic growth, where also in investment into military might, this region obviously is getting much more significant, and there is an awareness of that in Europe. The other factor being, of course, that there is an awareness in Europe also that US will gradually and incrementally also focus more of its political attention and resources to the Indo-Pacific region. We have underinvested into defense in Europe for decades, and we're having a crude awakening of that right now. Many of the Europeans are trying to ramp up defense investment very quickly, and it's a bit of a challenge. And Europe has to take more responsibility for its own security, and we do that as a way of actually strengthening the transatlantic link, not weakening it, because it's been subject to a lot of frustration in Washington about our underinvestments and underperformance in military might. So that are some of the drivers for us to be engaged into the region. Then about the format, I think that it's going to be shifting in characters. You have NATO having 4 contact countries in the region, of course. NATO is not a military actor as such into the region, but it has special contacts and relations into the region, foremost, of course, with Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia. And then, of course, you have the Quad, I think, which is an interesting format as well. And then you have the EU with its Indo-Pacific strategy. We actually arranged during the Swedish EU presidency also a meeting between the Indo-Pacific leaders in Stockholm and the EU leaders as well. So I think there's a special role also for EU to play in this context. And then you have all this myriad of also bilateral relations. So a cobweb, a few guidelines on how to go about doing these partnerships as well. And we don't need more photo opportunities. We need to assure that this kind of partnership actually achieve operational effect, and that they are tailored and not one size fit all to it. I think that, and that they are output focused. That I think is that's a few of the guidelines I think we should go about assuring that these partnerships actually generate mutual security as well. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll pass the floor to Yuan Ma. The mic is on.
Thank you so much for the floor. And I have one comment and 2 questions for all the panelists. And my comment is actually China has long attached great importance on global humanitarian operation and has long been contributor to global humanitarian operation. And I believe in the future, China is continue to cooperate with international community in the field of global humanitarian operation. This is my comment here, and I have 2 questions for all panelists. That what are main factors hindering global humanitarian operation, especially when we look at what happened in Gaza? And among those factors, which one is the most important one? Thank you so much.
That's a great question. Who wants to take it first? Minister?
I can just have a go. Apologize for being so Euro perspective on this, but some of the challenges we're having to not necessarily humanitarian operations and disaster relief, because those missions are time limited often. They demand a lot of international coordination and cooperation. But if you will ask what's the appetite for engaging into long-term state building efforts and the kind of stabilization operation and peace support operation goes with it, I think that the available resources in Europe in this regard are somewhat strained because, as I said before, a lot of the focus right now is on assuring a rapid increase in our ability to defend and defend. Also, the support for Ukraine has its toll also on our operational capabilities, and it's a lot of training missions there. So resource limitation, I think, is a factor, at least for these longer-term missions that demands multi-annual commitments as well. I mean, and there's no secret that the EU has been having challenges also in the Sahel region as well. The things have evolved into the wrong direction with lots of military coups, and we had to close down EU training mission in Mali, and we're closing down MINUSMA. So there are strategic challenges for us in this region as well. But if the host country doesn't want you there, it's very difficult to operate. That's also a lesson learned we've been experiencing.
Yeah, and I guess the big question is where do we find the resources for the stabilization mission?
Yeah.
That is actually the big question.
Yes. the challenges as perhaps encountered from a small island state like Fiji. One of our biggest issues in terms of success is the prevalence of disaster in itself, the fact that we cannot mitigate it. This is a big issue, so flood after flood after flood and cyclones, and it completely just diminishes the capability and the resources of the nation that is affected, and this is something that affected us at home. Another issue is trust, particularly the trust of the victims, trusting those that are providing the reliefs. Because our experiences are restricted to our region, we have similar perhaps culture, and we are able to relate to each other in terms of language, and these are very important to us. And in terms of the condition of the victim when we go in, and I kind of experienced this particularly in the missions to the Solomon Islands and also in East Timor, trying to establish relationship as we bring in the aid. They're treating us as foreigners and are unable to understand. That's a big challenge, and I think, in a way, this is kind of shapes the way the whole disaster relief, not only disaster relief, but other areas where military intervention has to take place in our region, that trust perhaps is one of the more important. So there is a tendency for victims to trust those who they feel are genuine about the way that they provide this assistance. And the other big challenge is for us, a small nation, is resource limitation, as has been alluded to earlier by my colleague minister from Sweden, Minister Johnson. We, a country like Fiji, are very rich in human resource, but we are unable to deploy. So the short answer to that is partnership. That's the only way this can work. One nation cannot do it alone, even the biggest nations of the world. So when we deploy, for instance, peacekeeping, we depend on strategic airlifts, even internally within the Pacific, to offer assistance to other islands. So these are way beyond the capability of our nation. So we are grateful that countries like Australia, New Zealand, the United States offer us this capability. So at the human level, where we are most proficient, we are able to make a difference for those that are victims. Thank you.
Okay, so disasters, whether these are natural or man-made, they transcend borders, they transcend political differences, cultural differences. So I believe that these factors, the political differences and the cultural differences, do not really play an important part as hindering factors. But I agree with the other speakers that it's usually the resources that would be the biggest hindering factor towards bringing the necessary assistance to the countries or to the people who are in need. But let me just add to this. Sometimes when we do HADR, one aspect that we usually neglect is the socio-humanistic interventions. No, we might be focused on bringing relief goods, trying to reestablish order, and repairing infrastructure, for instance. But for me, the most important aspect of that recovery is the socio-humanistic aspect of the recovery from a disaster, whether natural or man-made. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for a really interesting question. I want to build on what Minister Tikadua has mentioned about the central place of trust in effective operations. I will use elements of the Gaza conflict, but please I want to acknowledge I'm just going to make a comment in a couple of slices. I'm not getting into an extremely big, complex issue. So I mentioned earlier that we look in Australia at the question of, do we have legitimacy? Do we have political support across the actors? And do we have a force sufficient to at least protect the effort and the people that we're trying to support if we need to? Legitimacy. Just a slice of the Gaza issue. We have seen the erosion of the perception or reality of legitimacy of a UN organisation that works in the Gaza Strip. Whether it is real or it's just a perception of reality, that erosion of legitimacy has emerged. Political support. Do we have the support from all of the parties? Do we even know who all of the parties are to get support from? And how large is that force we need to be confident that our own people attempting to assist and the people we're trying to assist, how large that force have to be to affect the assistance, to the point where do we become a third or a fourth or a fifth actor in a conflict? Each of those, legitimacy, political support and the question of force, in this example, each of them fail because of a failure of trust. And if you might have heard of that expression, trust is the coin of the realm. With trust, everything is possible. Without trust, it's very, very difficult to do anything. Thank you.
And that's actually quite central, no? In the sense that really it's what is needed, because in some situations, especially in stabilization or longer operation, you really need to, you risk to become a fourth or fifth conflict party, even if you're there to stabilize. Morgan, the floor is yours. Let me just open the mic.
Thank you. General Campbell touched upon it, the issue of sub-state actors, and also touched upon a bit about local communities. So just thinking about the most severe humanitarian crisis in this region right now in Myanmar, for example, last year Cyclone Mocha struck in the Bay of Bengal, an area which in the past 6 months has been captured by a non-state armed group. So if this scenario were to unfold again in this upcoming cyclone season, then if international stakeholders wanted to respond, there would really be no choice but to work through a non-state armed group. And this is also the case across the country in Myanmar. So I'm wondering, where is the thinking about non-state armed groups? How do they fit into humanitarian assistance and response? Or perhaps maybe there isn't much thinking at this stage about that.
It's a great question, and it's actually something we are looking quite closely at the IISS, Morgan, myself, in our research. I'd be very curious to hear.
I'm going to just dip my toe in and jump out of the water again. So where do they fit in? Very uncomfortably. States do not, as a theory of states do not like giving equivalent status and legitimacy to non-state actors, particularly non-state armed actors in a brutal internal conflict. And so that creates a real discomfort even in the planning for the kind of scenario that you're describing. And here I would both seriously embrace but also turn to ASEAN and ASEAN centrality and ask, as a non-ASEAN nation, how can we support ASEAN in finding an ASEAN solution to this issue?
Yes.
Perhaps the more extreme situation, I mean, leading on, following from what General Campbell had just explained earlier, where the sub-state or non-state actor within what is a relative effective state. The extreme of that is that when there is only the sub-state, and that happens everywhere, when that is the legitimate, it is the only, where the actual state is actually ineffective. We had, in my own experiences, trying to handle refugees in the Lebanon back in the late, I'm talking about in the late 90s, early 2000, when Hezbollah was the only power. There was no civil authority at all. So we, acting for the United Nations, had no alternative but to actually work through them to deliver humanitarian assistance to the people who needed it. Whilst we did not recognize them as the proper authority, but they are an actor nevertheless. That's why it is important to always have proper guidance for any element, whether it be United Nations or whether it's from a state that is offering particular assistance. That perhaps is the greater extreme, or perhaps more convenient because you do not need to deal with the state. Because there is one authority and it is sub-state or non-state. So, that is another concern on its own. And no one has got any answer to that. I do not have any answer to that. It's something that you walk through and live through because, as we know, non-state or sub-state don't really recognize any proper authority.
Yeah, sometimes they are the ones that have the power, right? If
Yes.
if they control the territory, you have to be pragmatic, I suppose, Minister.
No, if you broaden the scope to private military companies, it certainly isn't a politically expedient tool in the great power competition. I'm of course thinking about the Wagner Group, the Radut, and now what the Russians call the African Corps inside sub-Sahara Africa or in the Sahel region, and there has been a major force to the detriment against our interest as well, because we take note, of course, how they act, and they have before had a certain degree of deniability vis-à-vis the Russian state. But I think the Russians now blatantly open that this is a tool that they try to exercise influence into a number of countries in the Sahel region, which is a challenge for us as well. And we need a strategy, and there are thinking inside the EU on how to counter these developments as well. But, of course, we've been engaged into the region as well in different shapes and formats.
And I guess my question, following up on what Morgan said, it's the cases where you have a situation, like for instance, in the current cases of Haiti, right, where there is really no authority. There is an authority, but it's actually not legitimate, and the non-state armed groups are actually stronger than the rest, and it's very difficult to understand the counterpart, right? Because it's so. I guess that's explained why it's very difficult to deploy a stabilization mission there. But how would you, I know that you were involved in Haiti at the time, so what are the challenges? I mean, what should change for a deployment to be effective?
Let me just relate to you the example in the Philippines instead. So we are facing the communist terrorist group in the Philippines, and whenever there are disasters in a particular area, we also have to work through them. But the way we treat them is that we treat them as victims as well of the disaster. So, because of course they are indeed victims. So we bring in the relief goods and all the assistance that we could give them during that disaster. So being humans, they would naturally accede to giving in, accepting the assistance themselves, and allowing the assistance to be given to the communities as well. So that's how we do it. Thank you.
Yeah, that seems like a good way to operate. Yeah. So I guess we actually know that there are we don't have a big problem in terms of short-term operation, and of course we know that there is a more long-term problem, which is actually how do we address adaptation and the ability of the vulnerable state, which are actually the one that are also most exposed to climate change. So that's a big problem, which I don't think we can of course, as the Minister was saying, of course we need more funding for adaptation and more support in that sense. But I guess the question is really, again, going back to where do we find the resources for the more long-term resources, the long-term deployment and stabilization. I mean, of course, we know we are all the countries are very much stretched in their resources. Also because beside the situation in Europe and obviously in the Middle East, there are lots of other wars going on, right? I think it's we are actually monitoring conflict at the IISS, and we know that this year, for instance, last report was actually the highest number of conflict across the world. So we tend to focus on 2 conflicts, but in reality there are 3, maybe with Myanmar, but in reality there are thousands and thousands of conflict. So what would be? I mean, I guess that's my last question. What would be a good idea? What can we do? Like, what are best practices or things we can do? We mentioned, of course, obviously cooperation with other countries, or cooperation with civilian authorities or civil society or other type of organization. But what could be other ideas? I mean, because I guess that's going to be the big problem for all of us going forward, and that is something that is also a risk for global stability and security, because of course it creates more instability and more problems and more war and more conflicts. So I don't know if any of you has any idea as final words of this session.
I'd just make the comment that, as was mentioned by a number of speakers, these circumstances are going to become more frequent, both because of climate change and because, as colleagues from the ICRC reminded me yesterday, there are 129 ongoing conflicts on this planet today. We, in the sort of Pacific region with partners, we do tabletop exercises, we do practical exercises, we bring the team together as often as is necessary, and it is regular each year. And I think it is trying to normalise, organise and procedurally streamline so that an effective regional or multilateral response can be mounted as quickly as possible, and as my colleague General Browner has noted, is focused on human dignity and on the needs of the affected region, nation, group.
Just a few remarks then. Another challenge is, of course, political bandwidth as well, that we have been struggling with, not just the resource allocations. One thing that we have been working on is how to become more resilient against crisis and wartime situations. Just as an example, we sent out a pamphlet to all households in Sweden, 4.7 billion 6 years ago, what to do in case of a crisis or a wartime situation strikes you. Very much hands-on. That's to increase resilience domestically in case we have a terrorist attack or we have a major natural disaster or a wartime situation. So you kind of have resilience by denial, and there's practical measures you can do to become more shock resistance. We've been talking for decades about having stronger regional leadership, of course, for in different areas, having strong regional organizations, that they should take a larger responsibility. I think that the result has been mixed. It's difficult to do. Third concept, of course, is how do you get the effect? Well, you focus on train the trainers as well. So that is, I mean, there will be some general reflections on how to handle the resource limitations that we are exposed to right now, and somewhat of the limited bandwidth that we're also exposed to.
Thank you.
Well, for me, there are 3 things that we could do. First is to put human interest above national interests. we should set aside differences when it comes to responding to disasters, whether it is man-made or natural. Second, we should protect our environment. Being the supreme beings in this planet that we occupy, we have been given the responsibility to protect the environment and mitigate the effects of natural disasters. And we also have that responsibility of protecting or preventing the extinction of certain species of flora and fauna. And third, while we were given the responsibility of protecting our environment, we were given the power to prevent man-made disasters, such as, well, there are a lot of things we can do to prevent man-made disasters. One of them is to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. Because once these weapons are unleashed, it is not only catastrophic to the human race, but to the planet that we occupy. This is the same planet that future generations will be living in, our children and our grandchildren. Thank you.
Minister, the last famous word.
I just wanted to add to General Campbell's point. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah. At the moment, in our region, there is a determination to be able to build a much more structured response capability. And I had alluded to that earlier. So building preparedness in all areas. For instance, General Campbell had referred to a facility we have in Fiji, it's called BlackRock. It's an HADR, readily available, ready to deploy capability. That is just in terms of supplies. But now we're building the human resource to go with it. In the recent past, through the forum, we have been able to, to deep into or contribute to a crisis in our own small ways without a joint capability. But that's exactly what we are trying to do now. I think because disasters are going to continue to come until we mitigate climate change, or whether it's a man-made disaster. But we need to have more structured response, particularly for us as small nations, when we do not have the capacity to be able to fully utilize the strengths that we have. So partnership still is important, but it has to be structured and not perhaps ad hoc in the way that we do things. Thank you.
And I think that's a good way to conclude. Really, the again need of structured partnership with specific, pillars and consistency, I would say. And of course, I think that really that what you mentioned, Minister, the need to mitigate. So that's, I think, fundamentally that's going to be one of the big challenge for the world. And as we know, also climate change is not just creating disaster, but is also exacerbating conflict across the world and suffering. So I think that's really the solution. We all know, but unfortunately, it's going to take a bit more probably commitment from the global north, right? In that respect. With that, thank you very much. Great. Please give a round of applause for our speakers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
속에서